What if I told you that trying to duplicate your local e-commerce success internationally is, well, it's actually the #1 reason global expansions fail.
Yeah, it's a massive trap.
Right. I mean, you get your domestic store humming, your fulfillment is this well-oiled machine, and you look at a map thinking, it is time to conquer Europe or Asia.
Mm.
But the traditional advice for going global is essentially to tear down everything you just built and start over from scratch.
Exactly. The conventional wisdom for a long time has been to essentially clone your business.
Which sounds exhausting.
It really is.
Yeah.
You set up a completely new website, you establish new inventory pools, you hire new staff just to manage this new regional dashboard. You go from managing a single cohesive brand to managing this tangled web of disconnected databases. I mean, it is an absolute recipe for operational paralysis.
Totally. And so today we're looking at a highly specific 20-minute B2B strategy guide that just completely dismantles that traditional open a second store advice. The guide dissects a system called Shopify Markets. And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how you can sell globally without ever leaving your primary dashboard. We're going to break down the costs, the underlying tech, and, the hidden traps that catch out growing brands.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core problem here really is the massive friction of cross-border e-commerce.
Yeah, and to understand how Shopify Markets approaches that friction, we really have to look at the architectural shift from that old clone everything model to a new one source of truth model.
Gotcha.
Because before a system like this existed, selling globally meant you basically had two terrible options. The first was forcing everyone, regardless of where they lived, to shop on your English site and pay in your base currency, like US dollars.
Which, I mean, that practically guarantees international customers will abandon their carts the moment they realize they have to do currency math in their heads, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that self-inflicted cart abandonment is exactly why merchants turn to the second option, which is the duplication route.
The cloning we just talked about? Right. They would spin up a brand new admin dashboard just for the UK or just for Australia. And that meant installing a new theme, uploading a totally separate product catalog, paying for duplicate app subscriptions.
Wait, paying for the apps twice?
Twice. 3 times, 10 times, depending on how many countries you expanded to.
Oh, wow. The compounding nightmare of that seems obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, if I want to fix a typo in a product description or, update a seasonal photo, I have to log out of my US store, log into my UK store, make the change, log out, log into my Australian store. I mean, it's exhausting just thinking about it.
It's totally unscalable. And what Shopify Markets does is collapse all of that fragmented architecture back into a single admin space.
So back to one dashboard.
Yes. There is only one product catalog. There is one inventory pool and one order workflow. You simply create markets, which are essentially just configurable bundles of countries, and that bundle acts as a localized lens placed over your single catalog.
Okay, let's make this tangible for the listener. The source material uses this great example of a buyer in France.
Yeah, the French buyer example is perfect. When that French buyer types in your web address, they hit a specialized domain. So something like fr.yourbrand.com.
Right.
Because they're looking through that France lens, they see your prices cleanly rounded to €19 a 9, rather than some messy, mathematically converted number like, 18.43.
Which always looks super suspicious to a buyer anyway.
Exactly. The product descriptions are in French. When they navigate to the checkout, they can pay with carte bancaire, which is a local French payment method they already know and trust.
So the front end is completely localized. It feels like a French store, but on my end as the merchant.
On your end, that French order lands right next to a domestic order from Ohio in your regular backend.
Wow.
Yeah, it uses the exact same scale, that unique product identifier code. It draws from the exact same inventory pool, and it uses the exact same fulfillment workflow. You literally never left your primary dashboard.
It's like having a single massive commercial kitchen, right?
Yeah.
You only have one pantry to track and one line of chefs cooking the food.
Yeah, I like that.
But depending on which dining room the customer sits in, the waitstaff hands them a menu translated into French, prices the meal in euros, and, accepts their local credit cards.
Yeah.
The front of house is totally tailored to the guest, but the back of house operations, the kitchen, never changes.
That's a great way to put it. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this architectural shift is massive because it eliminates the overhead of database syncing.
Right, keeping everything perfectly matched.
Yeah, ask any e-commerce veteran. Trying to keep inventory counts and product details perfectly synced across 3 different websites is usually where international expansion just completely fails. When you decouple the presentation, what the buyer sees, from the operations, what you actually manage, you remove the friction that chokes growing brands.
Okay, so now that we understand the structure, the kitchen in that analogy, we really need to talk about designing those localized dining rooms.
The front-end experience.
Exactly. The guide breaks this down into currency, translation, and SEO. Let's start with currency since, actually collecting the money is step one.
Fair enough. So to offer multi-currency checkouts natively, you do have to use the built-in Shopify payments processor.
Okay.
They handle the real-time auto-conversion, but there is a cost to that. You pay a 1.5% currency conversion fee if you are a US-based store, or a 2% fee in other regions, and that is tacked onto your standard credit card processing fee, which usually sits around 2.9%.
So the buyer in Germany pays in euros. Shopify takes a standard card fee, plus another 1.5% for doing the currency math. Does the final payout land in my bank account in euros or dollars?
The payouts always land in your base currency, so you don't need to go out and open a foreign bank account.
Oh, that's a relief.
Yeah. But you do have control over how those localized prices are presented to the buyer. The guide outlines 3 distinct pricing models.
Let's hear them.
The first is auto-converted. This simply takes the live foreign exchange rate from your base price and applies a rounding rule, like always ending the price in 0.99.
That sounds like zero effort, but I'm guessing if the exchange rate takes a sudden dive, my profit margin goes down with it.
That is exactly the trade-off, which leads to the second option, a percentage adjustment. This takes that automated conversion, but adds a flat uplift to a specific market.
Like a buffer.
Exactly. For example, if you were selling into Europe, you might add a 10% buffer to all your prices to help absorb the cost of VAT, the value-added tax that European countries apply to consumer goods.
Okay, that makes sense. It provides a margin of safety without forcing the merchant to micromanage every single item on the store. But what if I have like a flagship product where I want total control over the international price? I want it to be exactly €150 no matter what.
Then you would use the third option, which is fixed per scale. This allows you to manually set an explicit, intentional price for every single item in a specific market. It gives you absolute control over your margins, but, and this is a big but, the mechanism requires you to maintain those prices manually if your underlying costs change.
Right. More control means more work.
Right.
Okay, so the money side is manageable. The second part of that front-end friction is language. The source guide points out that translating your store is the second biggest conversion lever you have, right behind offering local payment methods.
Yes, and Shopify offers an app called Translate and Adapt that actually gives you 2 languages via machine translation for free.
2 free languages, pretty generous.
It is, and it allows you to manually override specific phrases too. Machine translation is great for bulk work, but sometimes it misses the nuance of a marketing slogan, so you can go in and tweak the product titles or the specific theme strings.
I hear that, and it sounds great, but let's look at this practically for a second. English is incredibly widespread globally, especially among people who are comfortable shopping online.
True.
So wouldn't it be faster, cheaper, and frankly less risky to just skip translation entirely? Like if they really want the product, they can read the English description.
I mean, it is very tempting to think that way, but it totally ignores the data-driven reality of consumer behavior. Yeah. Yes, a massive portion of international buyers speak conversational English, but the data shows they convert at significantly higher rates when browsing and buying in their native language. E-commerce is fundamentally built on trust.
That's a good point.
If a buyer has to work hard to understand your return policy because it is in a second language, they won't do the work. They will just click away. Skipping translation leaves a vast amount of money on the table.
Fair enough. But the guide highlights a very specific technical trap here regarding translation and SEO, doesn't it?
Yes, the duplicate content penalty.
Right.
This happens when a brand gets excited, launches 10 new country markets with different web addresses, but just leaves them all in English.
Which means you now have 10 identical English websites floating around the internet. How does a search engine like Google actually handle that? I imagine not well.
It's not well at all. Google's crawler bots allocate a specific crawl budget to your site, which is basically a limit on how much time and resources they will spend indexing your pages. If those bots waste their budget crawling 10 identical English pages on different URLs, they assume you are either incompetent or actively trying to spam the search results.
Yikes.
Yeah. In response, Google will sync your search ranking across all of them.
But the guide mentions that Shopify tries to prevent this by auto-generating something called reflang tags.
Reflang tags, yeah. They are essentially hidden snippets of code that act like traffic cops for search engines. They tell Google, hey, this URL is intended for French speakers in France, and this URL over here is for German speakers in Germany.
But the crucial point the source makes is that the code snippet alone won't save you. Like if you tell Google a page is for French speakers, but the page itself is fully in English, Google just ignores the tag and penalizes you anyway.
Yeah.
You need the actual translated content to back up the code.
Exactly. You can't trick the algorithm.
Wow.
Which brings us to the URLs themselves. How do you actually structure the web addresses for these different markets? The guide details a spectrum of investment, starting with the most robust but also the most expensive route, the CCTLD or country code top-level domain.
So that would be buying like your brand.fr for France or your brand.dd for Germany.
Correct. It sends the absolute strongest local SEO signal to search engines. But the downside is you have to purchase, register, and manage a unique domain for every single country you enter.
Yeah, if you are launching in 20 countries, managing 20 domain renewals every year sounds like a massive headache. What is the middle ground?
The subdomain. That looks like fr.yourbrand.com.
Okay.
It provides a very clean separation between regions, and search engines treat it as a semi-independent entity, which really helps organize your search results.
And what's the easiest route for the person who just wants to get started today?
The subfolder. This looks like yourbrand.com half-ass FIR. It is by far the simplest to configure. But more importantly, it inherits all the existing domain authority of your root website.
Oh, that's huge.
Right. If you have spent years building up your search ranking on your primary.com, a subfolder allows your new French market to ride the coattails of that existing SEO immediately.
Okay, so the digital dining room is set, the currency math is automated, the French translation is live, the subfolder URL is ranking on Google, and the customer has happily clicked buy. But this is where the absolute hardest part of international commerce kicks in. Moving the money and the digital bits is easy. Moving physical goods across actual borders means dealing with the taxman and the customs agent.
The taxing reality, yes. This is where Shopify offers a major fork in the road: standard markets versus managed markets.
Let's start with standard markets, which is the system included by default in most Shopify plans, right?
Yes. Under standard markets, you remain what the industry calls the merchant of record. This is a vital legal distinction. It means your company is legally the entity selling the product to the foreign buyer. Therefore, you carry the entire compliance burden. If you sell more than 10,000 euro into the European Union, you are legally required to register for VAT in Europe. You have to calculate the taxes, collect them, and remit them to foreign governments on their schedule.
For a lean team trying to grow rapidly, managing tax filings in 5 different countries sounds completely paralyzing. But the guide does mention one critical tool you get under standard markets, called DDP.
Right. DDP stands for Duties Delivered Paid. For a small transaction fee, usually between 0.5% and 1.5%, Shopify will calculate the exact customs duties required by the destination country right at the checkout screen. So the buyer pays those duties up front.
The flip side of that is DDU, or Duties Delivered Unpaid, and the source highlights this as a massive warning sign.
It is the biggest rookie mistake you can make. If you do not collect those duties at checkout, the shipping carrier will fly the package to Europe, drive to the customer's house, and literally hold the package hostage at the front door until the buyer pays a surprise customs invoice.
That sounds terrible for customer service.
Unsurprisingly, a surprise bill for 30 euros is the absolute #1 cause of refused international deliveries.
Yeah, the customer gets angry, refuses the package, and you are out the cost of the goods and the international shipping both ways. So turning on DDP is non-negotiable. But even with DDP enabled under standard markets, you are still the legal merchant of record filing the tax returns. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The alternative is managed markets. I like to think of this as hiring an incredibly efficient global legal fixer.
It is a very apt comparison. Under managed markets, Shopify officially steps in and becomes the merchant of record. They become the legal seller of the product. They calculate the taxes, they collect the duties, they handle the customs paperwork, and they remit the funds to the various governments for you.
They absorb the liability. I mean, if a product is misclassified and a foreign tax agency comes knocking, they knock on Shopify's door.
Exactly. But that level of insulation comes at a premium. Managed Markets charges a flat 3.5% fee on every international order, or 3.25% if your store is on a Plus plan.
Wow.
And remember, that is on top of your standard credit card processing fees.
Giving up 3.5% of top-line revenue is a tough pill to swallow for anyone. How does a merchant decide if that legal fixer is actually worth the premium?
The guide offers a very clear break-even calculation for this. You have to honestly assess your DIY compliance costs. You need to add up what you pay your accountants to file international returns, the cost of standalone tax software, and the hourly value of your own time spent dealing with customs forms.
And at what point does that math tip in favor of the 3.5% fee?
The industry data suggests the math usually flips when a brand crosses roughly $500,000 a year in cross-border revenue. Below $500,000, that 3.5% fee is probably taking a bigger bite than an accountant would. But as you scale past that, or if you are expanding into regions with notoriously complex tax regimes, that fee becomes an absolute bargain for the operational peace of mind.
Let's run a scenario to make this concrete for you. Let's say a buyer in Europe purchases a 100 jacket from a US-based store. Under standard markets, how does the payout break down?
Okay, so the buyer pays €100. Shopify processes the cart, taking, let's say, €2.90. They apply the 1.5% currency conversion fee, which is 1.50, so you net roughly 95.60.
Seems pretty good.
It does, but you now have a hidden liability. Your tax and duty compliance, accounting fees, and legal exposure are entirely your problem to solve and pay for later.
Okay, now run that same euros jacket through managed markets.
The buyer pays €100. You still pay the 2.90 card fee and the 1.50 currency fee. But now Shopify applies that 3.5% managed markets fee, which is 3.50. So you net roughly 92.1070.
Okay, so I walk away with a few euros less up front, but my legal exposure is zero and my tax filings are handled automatically. Now, I know a clever merchant might look at all these fees and think, you know what? I'll just use the no markets approach. I'll force that European buyer to check out in US dollars.
Yeah.
I save the 1.5% currency fee, I save the 3.5% managed fee, and I keep all my margins.
And the guide explicitly warns against this trap. It is a classic case of tripping over dollars to pick up pennies.
Right.
If you force a foreign buyer to pay in US dollars, yeah, you might dodge the software fees, but you are still legally exposed for tax compliance if you cross their local thresholds.
Worse than that, you are actively destroying your customer experience.
Exactly. When you force a foreign transaction, the buyer's local bank steps in to do the currency conversion. Banks traditionally offer terrible exchange rates, and they often slap a foreign transaction fee on the buyer's credit card statement. So a week later, the customer checks their statement, sees they paid significantly more than they expected, and they initiate a chargeback or demand a refund.
It's just not worth it.
No, you save a tiny fee on the front end, but you lose the customer forever.
Okay, so the digital friction is solved, and the tax friction is solved. But the physical reality of moving a cardboard box across an ocean still falls on you, the merchant. Which brings us to the operational gotchas. Markets is incredibly powerful, but there are physical and regulatory realities it simply cannot bend.
Yeah, and the most obvious one is inventory physics. Markets does not magically split your stock per region by default. You can present a beautifully localized French checkout, but if your only physical warehouse is in California, shipping that box to Paris is still going to take 5 to 10 days, and the last mile delivery costs will remain high.
Right. Localization doesn't speed up airplanes. What about returns? Managing international refunds is historically a massive headache.
And it remains a tricky area due to foreign exchange swings. The mechanism works like this. Refunds are always processed in the buyer's local currency. Imagine a customer in the UK buys a £100 coat when the pound is very strong against the US dollar. You receive a healthy payout in dollars.
But then, of course, a week later, they return the coat.
Exactly. If the British pound crashes in value during that week, you still owe the customer £100. But because the pound is now weak, it takes significantly more of your US dollars to buy those £100 back to process the refund. You can be left with a residual financial loss purely from the currency fluctuation.
Wow. The timing of the refund dictates the margin. That is a serious gotcha. We also need to touch on European privacy laws.
The GDPR.
The General Data Protection Regulation, and this is not optional. If you spin up a European market, you absolutely must configure GDPR consent banners for your site visitors. The regulatory exposure here is severe because fines are levied per visit to your website, not per sale.
Wait, per visit?
Per visit. You cannot ignore privacy compliance simply because you only have a few European customers.
That's terrifying. What about technical limits on the Shopify platform itself? Well, if you are on the basic or grow plans, you are capped at 3 active markets beyond your primary home market. Also, when you create those new subdomains or ccTLDs we talked about, the SSL certificates, the underlying security protocol that gives your website that little padlock icon in the browser, they can take 24 to 48 hours to provision.
So don't launch ads immediately.
Right. If you launch a new region and blast out Facebook ads the same morning, your users might hit a terrifying "this website is not secure" warning.
Another hidden reality the guide mentions is time zone locking. What's the deal there?
Yes, your back-end order timestamps and automated notifications remain locked to your store's base time zone. If your base is in Los Angeles and you promise same-day shipping for orders placed before 5 p.m., you have to account for the fact that 5 p.m. in London happens 8 hours earlier. It creates a major disconnect for support SLAs if you aren't paying attention.
Given all these gotchas, when does a brand actually need to pull the plug, ignore markets, and revert to the old advice of opening a totally separate second store? The guide groups these into 4 business triggers.
Yes. The first trigger is a fundamentally divergent product catalog. If you sell heavy winter coats in Canada, but lightweight rain jackets in the UK, and the sizing charts, SKUs, and inventory pools are entirely separated, Markets is the wrong tool.
The second trigger is legal.
Right. If you have established a completely separate operating company in the UK to satisfy local investors or banking requirements, you legally need a separate store to route those funds to the correct corporate entity.
Makes sense. The third is brand identity. If you sell premium luxury goods in the US, but you want to test, say, a deep discount strategy in Eastern Europe under a slightly different name with totally different marketing, Markets cannot help you. Markets localizes. It does not rebrand.
And the final trigger is strict regulatory environments. If you are selling into mainland China, or you deal in highly regulated categories like alcohol or pharmaceuticals, the compliance rules are often so rigid that they simply cannot be securely commingled in a single Shopify admin.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? How do you make the final call? The source guide offers what they call the honest test. You have to look at your expansion plan and ask one question. Would a customer in this new region buy fundamentally different products from a fundamentally different company? If the honest answer is yes, you must open a second store. But if the answer is no, if you are just trying to change the language, the currency, and the payment methods for the exact same products, then you use Markets.
What's fascinating here is how quickly merchants default to wanting a new store simply because they want like a unique homepage banner for a new country. They drastically underestimate the compounding weight of operational debt. Every app subscription must be paid twice. Every staff seat must be duplicated. Every manual inventory sync is a potential failure point. Markets is specifically designed to save you from that debt.
It really changes the entire calculus of expansion when you view it through the lens of avoiding operational debt. Let's wrap up our core takeaways. Shopify Markets allows you to localize your global presence from a single admin dashboard, keeping your databases perfectly unified. You should default to standard markets to start, utilizing DDP to avoid hostage packages. Only upgrade to managed markets when your tax and compliance headaches begin choking your growth, which usually happens around that $500,000 mark. And above all, avoid opening a second store unless your catalog, your legal structure, or your brand identity fundamentally changes.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Drawing on the source's advice about setting up a catch-all rest-of-world market, look at your analytics dashboard today. We tend to get tunnel vision, pouring ad spend into conquering specific high-profile markets like the UK or Australia. But what if your next massive growth surge isn't in those targeted countries?
Yeah.
What if there is a wave of organic demand hiding right now in your neglected rest-of-world bucket? There could be buyers in countries you haven't even considered, just waiting for you to flip the switch, turn on their local currency, calculate their duties at checkout, and finally remove the friction stopping them from giving you their money.
The demand is likely already there. It is just trapped behind bad architecture. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you've been staring at a map, paralyzed by the traditional advice of duplicating your entire business, don't. Take that first step. Go into your settings, turn on a multi-currency market, and see what happens when you finally open those localized doors to the rest of the world.